folks. Let's have some fun on America's Web Radio. We love idioms, and we want yours. So send it.
Okay.
It's only been on there for
Well,
since you started.
who knows? I'm getting.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
This is Professor Robert D'Agostino, and the show is Do Facts Matter? And, of course, the answer is no, and I'm going to demonstrate some of that today as I talk about what's going on. The last time I was on, which was 2 weeks ago, I talked about a religion that was in any form is incompatible with Western civilization. That's Islamic civilization. There was a wonderful book written some years ago about the clash of civilizations. And whatever you think about Islamic civilization, it's not compatible with Western civilization. It's a religion that's not compatible with the West, which, of course, basically, at least until recent years, was, and it still is in a lot of ways, predominantly Christian, with, of course, some Jewish foundation. So we talk about Judeo-Christian religion, we talk about Western civilizations, an amalgam of that, and Greek philosophy and Roman law. And we now have a second religion, and I think we have to recognize that we're not only in post-Christian America to a large extent, although a lot of Christian views still are still there. I mean, after all, where did the whole idea of the equality of man come from? It came. The Jews had patriarchs as well as matriarchs in the Jewish religion. Paul, in his letter to Galatians, talked about there is no east or west, there is no slave or master, there is no male or female, all is one in Christ. So we have a statement of equality, and I'll give you the sites of the biblical site. There's a couple of them shortly. But anyway, we have this really anti-Christian America. It's really gotten beyond post-Christian America. It's now really an anti-Christian America. Remember what then candidate Obama said about people clinging to their guns and religion. What religion was he talking about? It was Christianity, of course. If you look at what goes on in public schools and in cities around the country, Christian groups are being denied access to parks, for group affairs, to public schools. Other groups can come in, but not Christian groups. That's unconstitutional, and the ACLJ is on that and writes a lot of letters to a lot of school districts telling them they have to allow Christian groups the same access they allow non-Christian groups. Otherwise, it's viewpoint discrimination, which the Supreme Court has made real plain is unacceptable. Now, where are we now? Let's take a look, and I got a few notes here, and I want to kind of look at them. Not only, of course, are we in an anti-Christian America, post-Christian at least, but certainly anti-Christian, and certainly in the coast is anti-Christian, and certainly the Obama administration was anti-Christian. What about the Jewish establishment? Well, the Jewish establishment has long since given up Judaism as a religion in favor of maintaining being Jewish as an ethnic identity. I mean, take a look at typical Reform temples or synagogues. An awful lot of them just are outposts for the left wing of the Democrat Party. I remember a story from maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and there was a rabbi that was hired for a congregation on Long Island in New York. And he was a Reform congregation, and the rabbi came in and started talking religion, Jewish religion. And the board of that synagogue told him that he wasn't going to be renewed because that wasn't what they wanted to hear. What they wanted to hear was left-wing pieties rather than the demands of the Jewish religion. And I've been to a number of Reform synagogues, some of which are turning towards religion, and some of which are still just outposts for the left wing of the Democratic Party. And I think we have to understand that people are religious. They want a religion. And if Christianity doesn't do it, and the elites certainly are anti-Christian, if most Jews have turned, not most Jews, but a substantial number of Jews have turned against Judaism as a religion, what's the substitute? And the substitute is, of course, progressivism. Progressivism is a religion in every way, shape, and form. It has a sacrament, and the sacrament is infanticide, just like a lot of primitive religions. Yes, progressivism is a primitive form of religion. It accepts things that can't be proved, I shouldn't say that. He accepts things that are contrafactual. And the central doctrine of Christianity, the resurrection of Jesus, can't be proven or disproven. Otherwise, Christianity accepts facts. And it's a myth that Christianity is anti-science. Take a look at the history of the founding of the great universities. From the Middle Ages on, where almost all of them were founded by Christians. And certainly in the Middle Ages, Isaac Newton was a priest. The faculty were primarily clergymen. Oh, and this idea that, what about Galileo? Well, why don't you read, and people should read about Galileo and what really got him in trouble. He was protected by the Pope. He was told by the Pope that he could publish his stuff if he had some real documentation. Get some more documentation. You publish what you want. Well, he didn't listen to the Pope, it was his fellow professors who were most hostile towards Galileo because of his arrogance, his contempt for anyone who disagreed with him, and his attack on people who disagreed, even those who came after him who said, well, he didn't quite have it right, because Galileo still believed in these epicycles and perfect circles in terms of orbits of the planet, and that wasn't true, so Galileo took it seriously when people criticized him. Well, he didn't get it quite right, Galileo. Well, he wouldn't accept that either. So look it up. Look up the real history. So the real history of of Western Christianity is the acceptance of scientific fact, not the opposition to scientific fact, which of course it happened occasionally. But all those universities, look them up. University of Paris, look them up. Bologna, look them up. See when they were formed, and see who formed Harvard, Yale. See who formed those. Well, anyway, let's go back to progressivism. It is, of course, a pagan religion, and its main sacrament is infanticide. They like to call it abortion, but it's infanticide. And one can look at what's happened to a person named David Daleiden. I think that's how I pronounce his name, Daleiden, who's being defended by the Thomas More Society, and that's More is spelled More, the Thomas More Society. And why is he in trouble in California? Because he exposed illegal activity by Planned Parenthood. And therefore they've charged him, they've sued him civilly, they've charged him with criminally for trespass, for lying about, which of course he didn't lie about them. He found that they were selling baby parts, fetal baby parts. Let me read you this, what the Thomas More Society has done, and they are fighting an incredible battle. They had a judge, Judge Orrick, a federal judge who, let's just say, instructed the jury to find against David Daleiden on harm to abortion providers, Planned Parenthood, even though he exposed what they were doing. David Daleiden released a series of whistleblowing videos which depicted Planned Parenthood and another group that trafficked in fetal parts, STEM Express, roles in illegal harvesting and selling fetal body parts for profit. That's against the law, as well as violating laws against partial birth abortion, killing of born alive infants, and altering abortion procedures so as to enhance possibilities for securing, quote, from testimony by Planned Parenthood people, intact fetal cadavers, unquote. The National Abortion Federation sued Daleiden and his affiliated entities, as well as Operation Rescue head Troy Newman, under the Federal Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organization Act, a 1970 federal law which was designed to combat organized crime, as well as under 12 California state law claims. Well, journalists, which he is, have always been protected in California for exposing illegal activities, but not David Daleiden, because he is a heretic. He opposes infanticide, no matter what you want to call it. After all, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the great heroine, or maybe I should say hero nowadays, be politically correct, of the left, and a great abortion activist, in an interview with the New York Times Magazine, look it up, an interview published in the New York Times Magazine, said that she was in favor of abortion. Well, it was a population control issue. In the 70s, people were talking about overpopulation and running out of food, and she looked at that. And then she said, very interestingly, no follow-up, of course, and anyway, abortion gets rid of populations we don't want more of. I wonder what those populations are. Go look up the interview. Don't believe me. Look it up. It's in the New York Times. Well, where are we? Go back to the primitive religion called progressivism and magic. They believe in magic too. I mean, my goodness, magic. Of course they believe in magic. That's part of it. What do you mean they believe in magic, you say to me? Well, how can they believe in magic? They don't believe in magic. Yes, of course they do. If it's magic, boys can claim their girls. Girls can claim their boys. That's magic, right? How else do you explain it? They can convert themselves to any gender they want. And I don't know, one individual politician who was kind of an interesting guy said he actually counted 27 different genders that the left would recognize in this country. So where are we? So what's going on? And I think that we need to understand what the progressive left is up to. Yes, it's a religion, and a lot of people are suckered by the progressive religion, especially young folks. Young folks are always suckered by utopian schemes, and progressivism is a utopian scheme. I mean, who did Pol Pot use to kill fellow Cambodians? Teenagers that killed 1 million of their fellow Cambodians didn't have guns necessarily. They did it with shovels and axes and what have you. Mao Zedong, the Cultural Revolution, who did he use? Young folks. Who was attracted in France? Young folks to the French Revolution. Along with actually, if you look at the leaders of the French Revolution, they were the intellectual class, the professionals, lawyers, people, part of the petty nobility. They dominated the leadership. I mean, Robespierre, Maximilien Robespierre, was a lawyer. And of course, that goes right with Lenin, who always said that the intellectuals must lead the proletariat implicitly was too stupid to know their own good, what was good for them, and therefore they had to have the dictatorship of the proletariat was led by intellectuals. And when the proletariat did not agree, like those sailors in Kronstadt sailors, well, they need to be shot. Reformers need to be shot. Well, do progressives advocate shooting their enemies? I don't know. Not yet. We'll be right back.
And Robert, I'm going to take this opportunity to tell folks about some of the other great shows besides your show, Do Facts Matter, all of which are archived on our website, or you can go to iTunes or to Google's or to YouTube and see the shows that we do. And we have, I think, without a doubt, the best shows on radio. The Business Hour today with Chance Ritchie was super, absolutely super, and he had a guest on talking about the money, and he's going to be doing a show for us, as a matter of fact, starting next week, the money in sports, and it's called Sports Management, and Jack is the host of that show, and he is just super. Then we've got Doctor's Lounge. There's no other show on radio like that, the Doctor's Lounge. And we have Scott Barber and Hal Shears that does that they alternate doing that show, and it is incredible. Then today we also had our Kung Fu Master on doing meditation and helping you relax and helping you get a handle on what's going on today. And that's he reminds me of a little grasshopper, but he was orphaned at 3 years old, taken in by the monks, and he's 63, so he's been practicing Kung Fu for 60 years, and he obviously knows what he's talking about. Then we have Sandy Bostic, who is our agent in charge. Sandy was with Homeland Security, FBI, and then Homeland Security for many, many years. And he's been giving us the inside scoop on federal investigations and what you have to tell them and what you don't have to tell them. And it's been very, very interesting. Then we have, obviously, Do Facts Matter. And we also have, I hate to pat myself on the back, but we have David's Pick. And we're very blessed to have great veterans, generally speaking, on David's Pick. And then we also do with General Dix, Richard Dix, Remembering Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And it's abominable today that people have already forgotten about Desert Shield and Desert Storm and what we were fighting about and why we went in there. And the last thing I want to do is comment and support our Commander-in-Chief for making the decision, and I'm 200%, 1,000% behind him. And if the Iranians want to send their little fishing boats to attack any boat in our fleet, they're going to be blown away. And I think that's exactly what ought to happen to them. And I support Trump 1,000%. The sooner we blow one away, the sooner the Iranians will realize that we mean business and don't mess with us. Don't tread on our space. So anyway, with that being said, you're listening to America's Web Radio. If you'd like to become a part of America's Web Radio, contact me, David, at America's Web Radio, and we'll talk over advertising. We'll talk over whatever you'd like to talk about. And oh, by the way, if you're a veteran and you're reopening your business or you're about to start a business, contact me, David, at America's Web Radio, and we'll give you free advertising, which will go all over the world. If you're doing mail order, that's great because you can ship it anywhere you want to ship it. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me, David at America's Web Radio, and I'll be glad to talk to you. And now let's get back to Robert D'Agostino and Do Facts Matter.
Welcome back. Thank you, David. There are a lot of good shows. You didn't even mention your Venezuelan show.
That's true. I was writing them down and forgot to mention Let's Talk Venezuelan, and that's on Thursdays. 1 o'clock is English, 2 o'clock is Spanish. And we have people from literally all over the world listening to that show, and it's very rewarding, and it's I'm glad you reminded me. I'm sorry. That just slipped my mind.
Well, I'm glad I reminded you too. It's a great show. Okay, let's get back to the magic that the progressive religion believes in. We talked, and by the way, talking about the magic, boys can say they're girls and girls can say they're boys, and then of course boys who say they're girls compete in against girls in athletic events and of course win. See what happens in Connecticut. Well, the state of Idaho passed a law signed by the governor saying that boys are boys and girls are girls, and that, of course, offended the current religion. That's one of the doctrines of the religion. You can name your own gender. And, of course, the state of Idaho has been sued by the ACLU for discriminatory action, which is absolutely absurd. Hopefully the appeals courts will straighten this whole thing out. And if it goes to the Supreme Court, that would be too. However, we got to worry because one of the things, if you look up what the progressives are demanding of the next president, who they expect to be a Democrat, and they expect to keep the House and take over the Senate, and they may. We'll talk about that at the end of the show. One of the things they're demanding is that this packing the Supreme Court. There's nothing in the Constitution that says the Supreme Court is limited to 9 people. Hence, the left, if they get control of the Senate and they have the control of the presidency, can indeed pack the court. And if they pack the court, all bets are off because the progressives like to legislate through judges. They're not interested in Congress really, except to supply money, obviously. But their preferred legislative bodies are the executive branch and the judiciary, particularly the judiciary. So what else do we have? What other, let's say, magic do they believe in? What other things doctrines do they have that just aren't true? One of the most common one is crime causes poverty. No. I mean, that's true. Crime does cause poverty. Poverty doesn't cause crime. The left likes to say, well, poverty causes crime. No. It's the other way around. Crime causes poverty. And also causing poverty is a definition of poverty, which I'll talk about in a minute, because there's no way that 30 million Americans live in poverty, at least not before the pandemic that we just are now experiencing. I would say the number of Americans living in poverty is more like 5%, but we'll discuss that in a second. The other thing is, of course, this idea that the Great Society was a great boon to minorities. It was destroyed minority communities. Making aid for dependent children relieved men of the responsibility for their own children. Men could then defy community pressure to marry their pregnant girlfriends or to support their children. So, and Daniel Patrick Moynihan, I've mentioned him before. You can look up his article, which is published in Public Interest years ago. Daniel Patrick Moynihan was a professor at Harvard, sociology professor at Harvard, and he became an advisor to President Kennedy, an advisor to President Johnson, where the Great Society was thought up, an advisor to President Nixon, and then he became a Democrat senator from New York. And he wrote an article in Public Interest saying how the Great Society ended up destroying low-income families, particularly black families, who were doing quite well in the 50s. They were coming along in the 50s. Or as someone once said, we were winning the war on poverty until we decided to fight it. And of course, poverty is it's a comparative thing in America. It has nothing to do with real poverty. And this idea that 30 million people are in poverty, which is one of the rationales progressive use to say you got to adopt our policies. Look at all these people starving. Well, they're not. About 5%, less than 5% of the people that are considered in poverty have food insecurity at any given time, although I think it may have gone up at one point to about 14% of those who are said to be in poverty have food insecurity at one time or another. However, if you want to know about poverty in America, the U.S. Census Bureau is a good place to look. And of course, they do say, under the definition by the federal government, 1 in 7 Americans live in poverty. It's 30 million. However, this is from the U.S. Census Bureau, okay? This is U.S. Census Bureau. The typical poor household, as defined by the government, has a car and air conditioning, 2 color televisions, cable or satellite TV, a DVD player, and a VCR. The typical poor family was not hungry, was able to obtain medical care when needed. The typical average poor American has more living space in his home than the average non-poor European. These are all stuff from the Census Bureau. If there were children, especially boys in the home, the family had a game system such as Xbox or PlayStation. In the kitchen, the household had a refrigerator, an oven, and a stove and a microwave. Other household conveniences included clothes washer, clothes dryer, ceiling fan, a cordless phone, and a coffee maker. Not every home living in poverty had that, but the vast majority. That's the vast majority. I think it was like 84% or 85% by a chart I saw that had air conditioning. So being poor in America is to be rich elsewhere for most of the alleged poor. So I think when I talk to my students and I teach bankruptcy, we talk about the poverty. I said, look, it's the direction. It's not the number. When you say there are 30 million Americans, or 12% of the population is poor, or 15% is poor, whatever the number you come up with, look at the direction. Is the number of poor going down or up? Now, the Obama administration had proposed a change in how poor are defined so that the number of poor would never go down. The percentage of poor would always remain up because there would be a comparative number. So there would never be never possibly be a way to get people out of poverty with the rules changes proposed by the Obama administration. They want to make sure they had an excuse for the federal government to take over the country if necessary. And there's an interesting commentary that the Americans buy this nonsense from the left that people are starving. Look, Michelle Obama, bless her soul, was trying to get more nutritious food in public schools for those who were on the free lunch, some free breakfast, free lunch. And the nutritious food mostly ended up in the garbage. The pupils wouldn't eat it. They wanted pizza and macaroni and cheese, other things that were not all that healthy for them. And as one person reported in one school district, one superintendent of schools, and I don't want to mention the district, get him in trouble, he said, well, once a month we have candy day, and students can bring in $5, can have their pick of several candies. And he said, everybody comes in with the $5. That's how poverty-stricken the poor are. They come in with their $5. So the progressives want to keep that number as high as possible as a excuse for maintaining control. And I'm going to read here a few comments about what was called by an organization the world's deadliest religion, and they were talking about progressivism. And look, if you look at the history of progressivism, it is the world's deadliest religion. Modern progressivism started in the French Revolution. And it's very interesting to note that the leading pro-Bernie Sanders, pro-socialist magazine in this country is named after Jacobins. The Jacobins were the very people led eventually by Robespierre that created the Terror in France. So here we have this magazine in this country, socialist magazine, named after the group that created the French Terror. And the rationale, one of the rationales for the Terror was something like 17,000 people were sentenced to death during the years of the Terror, 1792 to 93 or 91 to 93, was that, well, we had to do it to unify France. People thinking this one country, for us to have a unified government and a unified country. Never mind that Vendée was in rebellion, and they went and killed everybody they could kill in there because they were royalist area, and they ended up killing men, women, and children. But that was part of the citizen army in France created by the French Revolution. And so now we have a journal, a magazine, I should say, that supports Bernie Sanders, or had supported him, that supports the whole socialist movement, that's named after a group in France that created the Terror. I think that's kind of interesting. And if you read some of the stories about people who were leading Bernie Sanders campaigns out in the country, they were talking about gulags, they were talking about re-education camps, because we have to create a utopia. Again, all the utopias, they're defined by the intellectual class. Those in charge then create their idea of utopia. And their idea of utopia, we know, French Revolution, Hitler had his idea of utopia. He was a progressive all the way. In fact, he was welcomed to power by the progressives. Look it up. Mao Zedong, Stalin, Lenin, and a whole bunch of other tyrants, Castro, Chavez. And how did that work out for the ordinary folks? Remember, well, you say, well, you know, they were dictators, and yeah, well, that's coercive. Yeah, they always kind of led that way. But let's take a look at a country that was very coercive in terms of their economic policies and adopted socialism in 1945 when Clement Attlee became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Great Britain, whatever you want, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. And he imposed a socialist economic system, right? New utopia. Everything's going to be wonderful, great. Clement Attlee is going to be the hero. And we get all this support from the Labour Party. Yeah, well, by the late 70s, the United Kingdom, Great Britain, was referred to as the sick man of Europe. Look it up. They were sick because they were falling behind the other countries, even France, Germany, Belgium, you name it, in economic, in wealth, in economic development, in innovation, you name it, and they were dropping behind. The sick man of Europe was rescued by, of course, Margaret Thatcher, who reinstituted a mixture of corporate capitalism and free market capitalism. And no, the Nordic countries are not socialist. They're social democracies. They have, welfare systems, but their economic system is again a mixture of corporate capitalism and free market capitalism. And the Prime Minister of Denmark, I think it was asked about being a socialist, and she was absolutely no. Denmark is not a socialist country. We're a capitalist country. And that's true of all the Nordic countries. So I want you listeners to think about, is there any successful socialist country in the entire world? And the answer is no. You can't find one. Venezuela? Cuba? I mean, even the number one socialist country in the world, China's been moving steadily away from socialism in the economic sphere. Because they still have a coercive government, obviously, and one would say that goes with socialism because, what's economically what's socialism called? It calls it imposition of a command economy. What does command mean? It means coercion. But let's take a look at some of the thing that goes on, because we have a situation in this country that's, I think, very perilous. We have an entire party given over to woke political correctness. We have a media that is their propaganda wing, and we have the corporations which, for their own reasons, have gone over to the other side. The idea that the big corporations support Republicans is nuts. If you look at the campaign contributions from the big corporate PACs and the corporate individuals who run the corporations, they're largely Democratic. In fact, we did a little study not too long ago of the 10 wealthiest people in the country. 9 out of 10 are Democrats. Now, that may not be true now because George Soros, who is in that list, has shifted $18 billion of his wealth to a left-wing operation that's allegedly a nonprofit to support left-wing causes. But if you take a look at the wealthy controls, he's still in the top 10. So you have 9 out of 10 are Democrats. Wonder why? And most of the reasons are economic. They're ultra wealthy and they want to stay that way, so therefore they want government protection. I mean, look at what's going on right now. I mean, who's going to really benefit from the bailouts? Yeah, ordinary folks will benefit to the tune of whatever the last bill is, $484 billion. One before that was $350 billion. What about the $4 trillion the Federal Reserve is spending to support the banks and the investment bankers? Take a look at what the Federal Reserve's doing and who's benefiting from all that. Too big to fail, Now, let's talk about the world's deadliest religion. Let's go back to that, and I'll talk about why they're in cahoots with the radical Islamicists. They both have the same, both progressives and the political Islamic movement, radical Islamicists, have the same goal: destruction of America as we know it. They all think that, they can come together and they can really work together in a lot of ways. The left protects, any criticism of Islam or Muslims as racist and what have you. And they both think it's like after World War II in Europe. The left-wing groups work with the communists. We're all left-wingers. We all want to put, equality and redistribution. And of course, once the communists got in power, and even with sharing power initially with the leftist groups, they promptly killed them. Alexander Nekem, who was in Hungary, was the Treasury, he headed the Department of Treasury, or analogous to the Treasury in this country. And he was, his party, the Peasant Party, of course, Alexander Nekem was not a peasant, obviously. It was noblesse oblige. Once the communists got in power and got the ways of dealing with, let's say, reformers, Nekem had to flee with his wife for his life. He was on the execution list. What did Stalin say after World War II when the communist troops moved into, the Soviet Union's troops moved into Eastern Europe? He said, "Let the former Nazis run the country. They know what to do." And the reformers had to go. And Stalin was just following Lenin's, dictates. People who advocated reform of the present system, not its overthrow, they needed to be shot. And Lenin did lots of that in the Soviet Union. Let me read this thing from the World's Deadliest Religion, put out It's a newsletter actually put out by WND. I guess that's the World News Daily, and you can look that up look this up at newsletter at mail.ynd.com. Newsletters. I'm sorry, not letters at mail.wnd.com. Journalists who condemn you as racist for referring to the Chinese or Wuhan coronavirus. Yes. Men who swear they are women. A presidential primary contest between a perpetually enraged old communist and a corrupt, excruciatingly senile politician who lies constantly. Giddy legislators high-fiving each other after legalizing abortion at 40 weeks, which is to say, of course, legalizing infanticide. A political party obsessed with eliminating America's borders, protecting criminals, and dismantling law enforcement. Let's talk about protecting criminals and dismantling law enforcement. Philadelphia has a prosecutor who won't prosecute. San Francisco elected a prosecutor who won't prosecute. They won't prosecute lifestyle claims. We'll get them lucky if they prosecute murder. They won't prosecute. And you say, well, they must know that that crime rate is rising. Yes, of course they know. Look at what happened to Baltimore. Baltimore, after the ACLU got finished with Baltimore and after the left got finished with Baltimore, the police became virtually powerless. Baltimore is now on a per capita basis the most dangerous city in the country. Look it up. You say, oh, well, Chicago's the murder capital. Yes, in numbers of people murdered, Chicago may still be the murder capital, but in per capita murders, Baltimore leads. And St. Louis is second. Hands up, right? That mythology that the thug put his hands up before being shot by the policeman Wilson, that was a myth. He did have his hands up. He was a thug, and he didn't listen to the police, and he was coming at the policeman in a threatening manner. But anyway, they signed an agreement essentially requiring the police to stand down, and now St. Louis, I think, is second only to Baltimore in terms of per capita murders. Now, you got to say the left must know. New York has gone backwards with these new bail. No one has to bail themselves out. They just released. If they're not violent, or if they presume not violent or minimal violence, can go out and rob again, maybe even mug again, and in one case murder again. They have to know this. And so you say, well, why are they doing it? Why are they doing exactly what says? Protecting criminals and dismantling law enforcement. Why are they doing it? It's very simple. Because they're following Saul Alinsky and Antonio Gramsci. And one of the things they advocated, you have to attack the society. You have to make people lose confidence in their own governments. And if their own governments can't control crime, can't control homelessness, lets people live on the streets in filth with rats running around, the idea is to make sure people lose confidence in their own government. And we're seeing that right now with the Democrats. That's what they want. Nancy Pelosi is willing to see the country destroyed over her hatred for Trump and over her determination to change the direction of this country. She would rather see a depression occur than to see Trump get credit for anything. And they have a win-win situation. If they keep the country locked down, which they're now advocating, that's today's advocating. They were saying that Trump went too far at one point. Now he's not going far enough. Let's lock the country down in order to create a depression. Then we win the next election. We keep the House. We take the Senate, and we've got everything. I will continue my discussion of the evil Nancy Pelosi in a minute.
The disease of addiction is a life-altering challenge, not just for the person suffering its effects, but also for the family and friends who support and love the one caught in its grasp. What should be the course of treatment? Who is the best person to render treatment? And what is the best place to go for the care that is needed? We know that you want answers to these and many more questions. Call 770-696-9862 and speak to a representative of the Atlanta Healing Center. They can tailor a program specifically designed to address the needs of the person suffering with an addiction or give you guidance as to where that help may be found. Information is the key, and the trained staff at AHC is here to assist. If you wish, you can also get more information on the website located at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
If your health insurance premium is more than your mortgage, Ellen Deal with Ideal Solutions is here to help. Whether you're a small business owner, individual, family, or baby boomer, email MAGA45CAG@gmail.com and I'll respond with 3 easy questions to help you determine if you can get away from Obamacare. As a 20-year veteran of the insurance industry, I'm here to help with all your insurance needs. Email Ellen Deal at MAGA45CAG@gmail.com.
Get your pen and paper ready. If there's a move in your near future, I'm here to tell you that the folks I used and now recommend is Around Town Movers. Timothy and the guys recently moved me, and I am and was totally satisfied with a sometimes not so fun experience moving. Call Timothy at 770-378-4708 and make it a good move and a good experience. Around Town Movers for that local or cross-country move. Timothy, Around Town Movers, in my opinion, are the best. That's Around Town Movers. Call them.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
It's Professor Robert D'Agostino of Atlanta's John Marshall Law School, back with my show, Do Facts Matter. And I was just talking about the failure. By the way, these people who are elected, who fail to prosecute, these prosecutors who fail to prosecute, George Soros is a big funder of those. So you throw a lot of money at these down races, not the ones that get the publicity, and suddenly they become viable candidates. And so we have Philadelphia, San Francisco, both prosecutors in those both cities don't prosecute if they can help it. But of course, I talked about what the reason for that is. They want to make sure people lose confidence in the government so they can reform the government. Go back to Nancy Pelosi. So if we keep this locked down, we'll definitely have a depression. We probably will not show any signs of recovery by the November election. And even someone as cognitively impaired as Biden might be able to get elected, although I don't think the Democrats in the end will run him. I've said, I was the first one to say that months ago. Other people are saying it now. I don't think that the Democrats have to figure out how to get rid of Biden without enraging the Bernie bros. Because if they get rid of him now, the Bernie bros are going to say, Bernie, he's up next. He gets the nomination. Well, they don't want to do that. So we'll see how they get rid of Biden. I think they get rid of him after the convention. I think they nominate him and then remove him after the convention.
And put in Cuomo.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think Cuomo's been running for the last 2 months, 3
months.
months.
He's running hard. Why did he appear on the Sean Hannity radio show for an hour? What's he appearing with Sean Hannity for? He wants to show he's nonpartisan. He's bipartisan. I should say bipartisan, not nonpartisan. Yeah, I think there's no question that Cuomo is running hard. And who knows? And that idiot governor of Michigan.
Whitmer?
Whitmer. Come on. What an idiot. Anyway.
No, she does not compare, in my opinion, to an idiot as much as AOC, when anybody says, oh, I'm excited about the Texas oil business going out of business, and doesn't realize that the Texas oil business is the business of the world. And the Texas oil business is what keeps America afloat.
Well, yeah, I mean, inexpensive energy, not only does it keep America afloat, it gives the third world the opportunity to develop and create wealth. I think I mentioned this before. Melinda Gates, who is very into this, has publicly said that billions of people have come out of poverty because they've turned to the free market. She didn't quite say it that way, but part of it is also because energy is inexpensive. I mean, I can just imagine the poorer countries in Africa or Asia, solar panels, windmills. There's nothing. I mean, windmills are totally inefficient. Why? No wind, no electricity. So how do you keep the electricity? You build batteries, gigantic batteries, which are very polluting in construction, and you have to have batteries to store the energy to use when there's no wind. Solar panels have some efficiencies on houses. In large scale, they're still not competitive. And the big problem, one of the big problems with solar panels is when you put an array of solar panels like they did in Arizona, all the reptiles get fried. The snakes, the turtles, the lizards, it gets very hot underneath the panels and they all get fried. So if you want to, eat tortoises and lizards and snakes, desert tortoises, lizards, snakes, well, they put solar panels up. Not to mention in windmills, they chop up all the birds. So, have fun.
And the sun goes down.
Right. Anyway, let's go back to this craziness, this crazy religion, and which is now adopted cultural Marxism, where Marx was talked about class animosities, class class warfare. They talk about identity politics and anything to divide the country so that they can then take over. Everybody loses confidence. Then they'll unify the country just like they did maybe in the French Revolution when they said the terror was all about unifying the country. I guess here they'll won't create a terror. They just put us in re-education camps. Pastor Robert Jeffries, he mentioned this. He was on President Trump's evangelical advisory board. He talked to today's Democrats. Quote, apparently the God they worship is the pagan god of the Old Testament, Moloch, who allowed for child sacrifice, unquote. The modern phenomenon of Americans killing their babies, 1 every 30 seconds, for the sake of having a better life, is strikingly parallel to the ancient practice of sacrificing newborn children to pagan gods. Now look, even the Guttmacher Institute, which is affiliated with Planned Parenthood, even their survey shows well over 70% of abortions are elective, convenience abortions. The number may be as high as 94 and 95%. And convenience abortions means my boyfriend made me do it. My parents insisted I do it. I didn't want another child. It would interfere with my career. And corporations love it. The last thing they want is their women employees taking time off to have babies. Great, delay your baby into the late 30s and work here. Don't take time off. You're a valuable employee. The last thing we want is you to take time off to have babies. So as far as corporations are concerned, it's a way of saving money, and therefore they're on board, and most of the major corporations are on board for these left-wing causes, including supporting abortion, including LGBT, whatever that movement's called, transsexual movement, what have you. It's one thing to say that we tolerate homosexuality is tolerated. It's disapproved of, but we tolerate it. Or we tolerate and accept homosexuality, fine. I'm all for that. But you don't have to go to approval. and then control? Well, that's what's happening. Let's read some other wonderful quotes. From Tucker Carlson, quote, "We're in danger of becoming a socialist country run by a terrifying alliance of authoritarian big tech moguls and wild-eyed identity politics cult members," unquote. He also said, quote, "Every society has a state religion, whether it's acknowledged or not. In our country, our state religion is woke politics. And if you don't go along, you're a heretic, and heretics need to be destroyed, burned at the stake in the old days, at least for a limited amount of time. Now fired from their jobs, denied jobs, ridiculed, called racist, called deplorables." William Barr, the Attorney General, who's very careful about what he says, quote, "In any age, the so-called progressives treat politics as their religion. Their holy mission is to use the coercive power of the state to remake man and society in their own image, according to an abstract ideal of perfection. Whatever means they use are therefore justified, because, by definition, they are a virtuous people pursuing a deific end, godly. That's a word meant to. He could have said godly end. Isn't that true? They proclaim all their virtue. I have a colleague who's I like him, and you cannot talk to him about anything that is non-progressive. He just stares at you. You can quote all the facts you want. He was mentioning the interview that Biden did on CNN, where the two people interviewing him were embarrassed for him. He was so incoherent. He was so obviously suffering a cognitive decline, and they didn't know what to say. They didn't know what further to ask him. They looked actually embarrassed. "Oh no, Biden's fine. He's fine. He'll be a great president. He'll just do fine." Yeah, like sure he will. I mean, he was a second-rate, third-rate, fourth-rate senator. No one in the Senate. I lived in Delaware when he was a senator for a long time, and he was a joke. He was a joke in the Senate. When he used to get up to speak in the Senate, his colleagues used to leave. Look it up. And telling the truth was not part of his operation. And then we have, of course, the famous Ron Reagan atheist ad, which aired in the Democratic debate. He was, quote, "not afraid of burning in hell," unquote. And of course, since that was aired during the Democratic debate by Ron Reagan, Rush Limbaugh said, quote, "It may be one of the most perfect ad placements in the history of advertising," unquote. In the Bible is Moses. God said through Moses, quote, "Now choose life, so that you and your children may live," unquote. So that's an amazing thing when you read it, and you read some of the commentary in the Talmud, why the Jewish community tends to be the most pro-abortion. They also tend to get the fewest abortions per capita. You explain it. Let's see. Obviously, progressivism is a secular religion, kind of. It's really religion, and it's to supplant Christianity. And Dennis Prager, who's a rabbi, his comment was very interesting. Quote, "The left-right divide is about reality itself," unquoting. Highlighting how half of Americans cannot distinguish truth from falsehood. And of course, the left, the progressive left, is always going to put heaven on earth. Whether it's Hitler and everybody's German or Aryan, that would be the ideal society. Whether it's Pol Pot, want to remake the Cambodian population by killing all those who can't be reformed, what Mao Zedong and his Cultural Revolution, all of this is about remaking it. Heaven on earth. And of course, the creation of heaven on earth always ends up with creating hell. And let me remember left-wing, this is a quote, remember left-wing idealists who are, as a rule, see themselves as more moral and virtuous than the rest of mankind, were directly responsible for the deaths of well over 100 million men, women, and children. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
The